My name is Tony Fleo, and I have the privilege of serving as the CEO of Social Venture Partners Dallas. We are an organization of engaged philanthropists, men and women who give their business acumen, their talent, and their treasure to support the social impact community here locally in Dallas. Today, I'm being joined by a panel of leaders of philanthropic communities, some of which are the most respected in our city. They have served in leadership roles and have served our community very well. These are unprecedented times for us, and we look to leaders in every sector of our community. And today we are going to focus on the leadership that is the nonprofit and the social impact community leadership. I'd like to welcome Jennifer Sampson, who is the president and CEO of the United Way of Dallas. I would like to welcome Matthew Randazzo, President and CEO of the Dallas Foundation, David Scollin, President and CEO of Communities Foundation of Texas, and Roslyn Dawson Thompson, President and CEO of the Texas Women's Foundation. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining. You know, just about a little over a week ago, we knew that the Dallas community that serves the most vulnerable of our people would want to hear from the leadership, from the funders, and we decided that we would ask these four folks to join us on this conversation. I was overwhelmed by the generosity of their response. Within an hour, they were all in, and yes, they were willing and ready to jump on this and speak to the larger community. I am very grateful for your spirit of collaboration. The work that you have been doing has been phenomenal. We did not anticipate that the need would be so great, that the interest would be so great. But we have over 1,000 people registered for this session today, and so we know how much the community wants to hear from you. So Jennifer, if you will, I'm going to give you the first question and ask you to just comment on how the United Way has hustled to make a response to this and what you're seeing in the philanthropic community at large.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you for working so quickly to set up this call. It's today, and this discussion with my colleagues and peers and all of you that are tuning in has been one of the highlights I've been looking forward to all week. So thank you for your leadership and Social Venture Partners Dallas. So I'll tell you a little bit about the work that United Way of Metropolitan Dallas has done over the last couple of weeks. We really went about this work in the way that we work 365 days a year, which is to really address the most urgent and immediate needs in our community. We've been doing this for over 95 years, and in times of crisis, our work really accelerates, and as does all of the nonprofit sector. We really dig deep in times of crisis and times of need, and this is certainly this is a great example of how we've worked together. United Way worked early in the week to identify the real-time needs of our community, leveraging our partnerships with the organizations that we fund, as well as our community partners. And that's about 200 nonprofit organizations, a little over 200 nonprofit organizations in our community. We did a real-time needs assessment and reached out to all of our partners, and we asked several questions. One, what are the most critical needs that you're facing? Two, what are the service gaps that you're seeing as a result of the current environment? And three, if you're organizations that work with volunteers, what type of disruptions are you seeing because you don't have the access to volunteers that you typically do? We then took that information and really started thinking about what are the most urgent needs. We made some midterm and longer term projections, and we compiled that information into a needs assessment that will be a dynamic document that we will continue to update over the weeks and months ahead. After we did the needs assessment, we really identified some key areas of focus, and immediate needs that we identified in the needs assessment include food insecurity, access to food and basic supplies, access to critical services, including healthcare, childcare, and care for adults with disabilities, access to alternative sources of income because of job loss and disruption in employment, access to internet and technology, particularly for students who are distance learning at home, overcrowding in shelters, and loss of funding to support ongoing nonprofit organization operations. We used the following criteria to assess our opportunities for funding. First priority for us is really looking at critically important emergency requests, including access to food, access to essential healthcare, access to emergency assistance for vulnerable populations. Also, support to allow first responders, healthcare professionals, and other essential workers to continue working, and assistance for shelters and group living facilities to provide safe, healthy living conditions, incorporating social distancing standards. Those are our priority one funding criteria. Priority two is access to alternative sources of income and access to internet and technology. And priority three will include ongoing operating funds for nonprofits that provide essential services and support, as well as alternatives to volunteer staffing for nonprofit organizations. We have our first funding call tomorrow to make some investment decisions, and we feel like we will be in a position to make some announcements about grants midday tomorrow. We launched a fund 2 weeks ago, the United Way of Metropolitan Dallas Response and Recovery Fund. And as of last night, we have a little over $2.2 million in that fund. And so we will use the grant criteria to review grants and make investment decisions quickly. We were very excited last week to partner with the funding community. I think there are 16, there may be more than 16 now, but there were a large number of funders who came together to work on a common application for grant requests. That was launched 2 days ago. And as of last night, I know Susan Hoff is on this call, but as of last night, I think we had over 500 applications in that portal, with about 85 that were complete. So that is the nonprofit community coming together, working together to identify the greatest need, to prioritize funding requests. And we're hoping that this lessens the burden for the nonprofit community, so they're not having to fill out 25 different applications for funding. They can use one common app to work with all of the funders in the North Texas community. So that's where we are right now. That was a long answer to your question, but we're mobilizing. We are ready to address needs, and we are eager to make grants and look forward to making some of those decisions tomorrow.
Thank you, Jennifer. And as always, thank you to the United Way for your leadership and your quick responses that you have to our community. Matthew, I want to turn to you for a moment. You know, the conversation and the phone calls that we are experiencing are all around nonprofits trying to figure out how they're going to maintain their own budgets, keep their own staff, how they're going to manage this new reality that we live in. You recently wrote an article about how philanthropy needs to respond differently now to the nonprofits that are doing this work. Could you comment a little bit about what you're seeing, what you're thinking, and how the Dallas Foundation is responding?
Absolutely. Thanks, Tony. And thank you to my peers for joining on this webinar for really just unprecedented times in the North Texas community. So Tony, there are a few things that the Dallas Foundation did really immediately to lessen the burden that our nonprofits across North Texas are facing. So first and foremost, we took a look at all of our 2019 community impact grantees, and we communicated to them that all of our 2019 giving is now unrestricted and can be deployed as necessary to support the ongoing needs of the organization. Funders historically have loved to fund programmatic things with very specific outcomes, and there is a place and time for that. but we are at a moment where we need to be bold and flexible and responsive to the nonprofit sector and free up those resources that were previously encumbered. So that's the first step that we took to ensure that our partners have just the flexible operating capital they need to meet this moment, which we know is so critical. We then took the time to pull together our community philanthropy committee in an emergency session last Friday, and we said, okay, how do we nimbly respond to this moment in grant making for the balance of 2020? And so part of what we did is we mobilized $1.75 million in funding to meet this moment. And we created a set of criteria, not too dissimilar from the process that it sounds like the United Way went through, to say, what are the 3 to 5 big rock issues that we want to fund? But really, most importantly, Tony, it was, how do we ensure that we're mobilizing these funds in a way, again, that is unrestricted and flexible and trusts our nonprofit partners to know what the needs of the community are. Any institutional philanthropy certainly has a good sense of the needs of the community, but I think we're kidding ourselves if we think that we know and understand the grassroots and grass tops needs, as well as some of the trusted both blue chip partners in the community and more grassroots community-based institutions. And so one of the 5 priorities that our board set in responding to this moment is around supporting and sustaining nonprofit operations and capacity building during these times. And so we're making unrestricted gifts, and we're, again, trusting our nonprofit partners to balance doing well and doing good in the community with their constituencies, but also encouraging these nonprofit partners to focus a bit on self-care and what it takes to sustain the level of work that they are taking up in this moment. And that's just really, I think, the clarion call for all institutional funders and individual givers. Trust your partners, give them flexible resources, and know that they will deploy them to meet this moment in a way that we probably couldn't strategize more effectively than what they're doing right now on the ground.
Thank you, Matthew, and thank you for your leadership in helping us all understand how differently we have to approach these things given the circumstances that we are facing now. Roz, I wanted to ask you about one of the questions that we keep getting over and over is, how will the pandemic and the immediate issues affect the long-term funding cycle that you all are involved in? Will it?
Thanks, Tony.
Many organizations look to funders to do the kind of consistent annual gifts. And so I just wondered if you would comment on that for us.
Sure. And I want to thank you, as all my colleagues here have, for SVP pulling this together in this conversation. I'm proud and privileged to be part of. Thank you. We, like our friends, we're looking at the immediate, and then we're looking at more mid and long-term realities. On the immediate basis, much like Matthew articulated, we have spoken with all of our current grantees and converted the programmatic grants to general operating grants. But in terms of the actual cycle, again, I feel repetitive, Matthew, you're a wise man, but we are looking at this coming year wholly differently than we have in the past. We have to anticipate that next spring, in 21, spring of 21, we might have a community grant cycle as we traditionally would have had. But for the balance of 2020, I think our calendar is dictated by the community's reality. And so we're all in more of a position of responsiveness than we are of planning to a great extent. However, that said, we still believe it's important for us, given our size and given the scope of the folks we work with, which traditionally is lower income women and families, women at the margins. And so in that sense, our goal is to have a series of funds that we can deploy toward mid and longer term solutions, knowing that many of our wonderful people on this call will be meeting the immediate needs, that perhaps part of our space is to look a little bit further down the road at what happens to our 63% of hourly workers who are women and many with families. What happens to them when eviction protection concludes, or when, you know, really the jobs are not back in play? So I think our view is really, we have something we're calling our resilience fund that we're raising monies around to support those mid and longer term solutions, specifically for lower income women and families. And that activity will take place, launch in April, and it'll be a rolling reality of grant making and support of those kinds of solutions.
Thank you so much, Roz. Dave, I'd like to throw it to you to chat a little bit with us. You have a long history as a business leader and now serving in this role the last couple of years. How do you handle it with your own employees from an employee perspective and making sure that your own folks are taken care of well? And what advice would you give to nonprofit leaders who are working with their own employees during this time?
Well, that's a great question, and I'm going to come to that in just a second, but I want to reflect first of all, and thank you, Tony, and your organization for putting this thing together. I think it adds a lot of value to our community this time that we're having the opportunity to share with each other. And although each of us, the four leaders of philanthropic organizations, will tell you our view and what we're doing, I'm struck by the connectivity that we've been able to have here in just over the past week. I think it's fair to say we've had a very good working relationship for quite some time. And in the absence of that, we would never have been able to pull together the North Texas Care funding initiative. That's going to take us to a whole new level of collaboration. And my own view is our grant making process will never quite be the same, even when when we're able to get past this. I think we're going to learn some things from this process that will make us even better grantors and supporters of this community. And I just want to say to all the participants who came in today, I'm also struck by that, 1,000 or so participants, indicating what a community of connectivity that we have. I just want to extend my empathy, my appreciation. I know there are personal and professional issues going on through all your organizations, and we're feeling them too, which brings us back to your question of our people. At Communities Foundation of Texas, we have over 100 people. It's a lot, in part because we have an educational consultancy called Educate Texas. So we have a lot of people that we have had to move them into their homes. In our organization, we have a lot of assets that we're proud of. But guess what? There's not one of those assets that makes a difference unless it's enabled by a person. And so our team members are crucial to our ability to support this community in a tough time. And so job one is making sure that we've got everyone taken care of. And so they're at their home. We've been focused on that. We want making sure the technology works. Thank God it does. That's the easy part. Actually isn't so easy, but that's the easy part. The next element is to get our team members comfortable. And we have begun by asking each individual, what's going on in your family? And we're doing it through supervisors and starting that dialogue. We're trying to understand with each and every person what's going on in their life that impacts their ability to be supportive and to do their work. And we've learned some pretty interesting things. And understanding that allows you to empathize. It also allows you to think about, do we need to put some loans in place or to do something distinctive? And we will be doing some of that, because the reality is the sooner we get our team comfortable and refocused, the more effective that we can be. And so to a person, we've gone through each individual and we've said, okay, we know what your priorities were. Let's start letting some of those go. It's okay, take these off your list. Develop a list of what you think is the most important. Matthew said earlier, the nonprofits know what's most important. I agree, they do. Our people know what's most important in terms of the work that they need to be doing. So we ask them, we're trying to realign on goals and get reset, because the more focused our collective team is, the more supportive we're going to be able to be of the nonprofits and this community. And I think the same holds true for every one of the nonprofits. And I'll just add one more example. one of the things I'm trying to do, we're doing these webcasts department by department within CFT, and I'm getting on some of those webcasts, and I'm not the speaker, I'm mostly observing, and I'm looking at the faces of my colleagues that are fantastic people. And maybe 2/3 of them just look so serious. And normally you get on something like that and it's just so upbeat, you can hardly stand it. But it's very serious looks. And it's not until late in the meeting when we have kind of a fun time and we ask everybody to bring a child into the room or their favorite pet or animal or something that they're interested in, start showing others, that the smiles really come out. That's a recognition of a reality that we're experiencing, and I know everybody on this call has some degree of that unease, and helping work through that unease. Collectively, we are strong together, and I'm just glad you're doing this today because it's cathartic and it's important. Thanks.
Thank you, Dave. You know, one of the things that I have been thinking a lot about as I prepared for this session and was reading all of your websites and your storied histories of your organizations. A couple of you have been in Dallas for almost 100 years now. It's 160, you know, close to 40. Social Venture Partners is probably the youngest, only having been here over 20 years. But what I do know is that the men and women who formed your first boards, who were your first donors, the men and women who continued to serve as your board of governors throughout these many years, they're the ones that have prepared us to be in this position of strength that we are in today, so that we can all respond from those positions of strength. Jennifer, what would you say to your current donors, your current board, about the importance of their role right now at this particular time and place?
Well, I mean, in a time of crisis, you know, it's more important than ever before, but the people, the founders of United Way, those that serve on our boards, our leadership, our staff, our partners across the community, and they're in this business because they want Dallas and North Texas to be the best place for all of us to live, work, and raise our families. So, you know, in times like these, we are absolutely focused on critical, immediate, and urgent needs because we have to. But we also, as my colleagues have said, have to keep our focus and our eye on the future, because we're going to come out of this on the other side, and our work will be more important than ever before because we're going to be leaders in rebuilding. And for United Way, our focus on education, financial stability, and health, education, income, and health, the building blocks for strong communities, are critically important because they're necessary for everyone to thrive, and they're necessary for everyone to have an opportunity to reach their full potential. So, you know, we are digging deep as a sector right now because we have to, but this is the work we do 365 days a year, 24/7. It's accelerated right now, but this is when we shine. This is what we do, and we're going to work, and we already are working in partnership and collaborating with each other. And you know, my colleagues have said this, it's the way we're going to have to work together in the future. Collaboration amongst nonprofits, collaboration with government, the nonprofit sector, with corporations, coordinating and collaborating across all of our sectors is going to be critically important as we move forward to meet urgent needs today, but also those longer term needs that we know are coming in the weeks and months ahead.
Thank you. Matthew, what kind of conversation are you having with your boards who are also major donors to your organization, and how are you encouraging them to double down?
Tony, I think, you know, this is an unprecedented moment, and we have asked our board to be nimble and to be flexible, to lean into the role that a community foundation has historically played in this country, and that being to be a convener of individuals and resources, and to serve as that critical bridge between community, the nonprofit sector, and those positioned in the community to give generously and to meet the moment. And so I've been really proud of our board's ability to flex. We've asked a lot of our board in the last 10 days. We've asked them to suspend grant-making processes. We've asked them to suspend traditional grant-making applications. We've asked them to concentrate more of the grant-making in the hands of staff and community philanthropy committee so that we can be nimble and flexible. We have asked them to be a resource in the community with their own means and to give to, whether it's our COVID-19 relief fund or to make an unrestricted gift to the nonprofit that they love most. And they're meeting this moment. And my hypothesis here is that that's true of every one of those boards that's on this call today, and so many nonprofit boards across the sector. We are asking a lot of them today, and these are, as we all know, volunteer, non-paid gigs. And I think our governors and our directors are stepping in to uncertainty with optimism, with hope, and I'm really grateful for that. And I know that I couldn't do this work without their support. And so we're meeting the moment as best we can. And I think, to Dave's point, and a point that has been echoed from the other panelists, I don't know what the new normal will look like, but I'm pretty damned confident that the go forward plan and playbook is going to be dramatically different from how we have operated as individual institutions in the case of the Dallas Foundation for the last 91 years. I think we will see more collaboration. I think we will see a real balance between being responsive and being strategic. I think those are two tensions that philanthropy struggles with nationally. And I think that we're going to see closer hand-in-glove partnership across these four institutions and the myriad of family foundations and corporate foundations that are serving this community today. So just thanks to my board, thanks to the collective set of volunteers that is fueling, empowering, and in many cases feeding the sector to do this work and meet this moment.
Thank you. Dave and Roz, I'm going to ask you both, Dave first, to comment on this. Philanthropy there's often a critique on philanthropy for taking too much money and reserving it on the sidelines and not deploying enough for immediate needs in the community. I would have been on the side of that critique up until just a few weeks ago, when now I understand how important and essential having large sums of reserve for these organizations to pull from. What I'm asking you both to comment on is, what changes in criteria will your organizations be making? Will you be pulling from those reserves in greater ways than you have in the past to meet this immediate need? Dave, would you comment on that?
Sure. Well, we do have endowments and assets set aside into perpetuity, and we are going to protect that because the future is a long time, and this community needs us to be a player for a long time. Having said that, times are right now to do more than the normal. And I think we have to look at everything, be respectful of historical processes and patterns, but we're in a new reality and we have to look at things different. What do I mean by that? Well, some of the granting that we're doing is going to be going out into taking funds that we might have granted next year or beyond. So I do see us dipping into some of that endowment for purposes of doing some things that need to be done. Are we going to damage that endowment that restrict us dramatically? No. By the way, are we already impacted? Last time you looked at the stock market, yes, we're already impacted. So we have that going for us. But we will work through that. There is no question that it's time to be more creative under the circumstances. Matthew used the term nimble. I agree with nimble, but I would change the word a little bit and say, let's be even more creative. This most recent idea that was identified, not by us, but we were helped support it, this Shift Smart organization, which came together with the North Texas Food Bank, led by Anurag Jain as their chair, and came up with this Get Shift Done effort, which is to create third-party funding from major players. They've committed already $2.5 million to provide funding to pay minimum wages to hospitality workers who know how to work with food, to go work with the food bank. By the way, they depend so heavily on volunteer workers. Well, obviously volunteer workers in convening areas, it's not where, you know, they're dropping off. And just this past week, 1,000 employees came together, funded by third parties, to deliver 1 million packaged meals for families here in this community. It's just a huge thing. And that's exciting. It's time for us collectively to get even more creative. And that observation goes out to our colleagues who are on this webcast today, that it's time to take a fresh look at everything we do. How do we do more with less? How do we deliver the service that's needed? It would be horrible to have a lot of nonprofits fall out of this period of time because we haven't figured out solutions. So we're going to have to be partnering across this community.
Thank you. Roz?
Sure, I'll pick up on Dave's talking about creativity. There's grant making, and then there are other ways that we can be strategic partners with the nonprofit community through our investment strategies. And this is something that I think, certainly SVP has been a big part of this conversation as well. But we have protected endowments, and that's great. We have key strategy funds that have been sitting targeting childcare and some other of the critical needs around healthcare access that will deploy in a different way and perhaps a more aggressive way in the current environment. But we also have assets, invested assets, direct investment assets that we can reconsider how those are deployed, or reuse some of our existing invested assets to guarantee loans for nonprofits, to do some of the more creative ways that assets and resources can be deployed to bolster and support through truly a financial vehicle, as opposed to strictly through grants. And so a lot of our activity is in looking at not only what's going to flow out through the grant making reality, but we happily months ago converted all of our assets to 100% mission aligned portfolio. We're trying to work for women and girls at the, in the invested asset base as well as in our philanthropy. And I feel like there is a huge opportunity for all of us to look at how do we deploy. My lights go out, you can tell. No, but is that funny? I have to turn my lights on. It doesn't allow me to sit very long. But in truth, how do we deploy our assets to a more creative mindset that says it's not only in the immediate needs and grants that we can make, but it is in the longer term ways that we can invest in the long-term sustainability of the nonprofit community that goodness knows our whole economy in North Texas depends on the health of the North Texas nonprofit community.
Absolutely does.
Tony, can I offer a comment there? This is Matt.
Sure.
I think Roz was spot on in saying, how do we get creative around the deployment of these assets? One of the things that has been circulating among many members on this call and a number of additional philanthropies in town is, how can we strategically leverage these endowments for operating capital for nonprofits? So one of the things that we're collectively exploring is, how do we create an emergency loan fund? How do we think through deploying DAF capital in a different way? I mean, today at the Dallas Foundation, we have about $500 million in assets, almost all of which are donor directed. And certainly we are encouraging our donors to get grants out to the community immediately. We need that support. But we know that there are hundreds of millions of dollars of assets that can be deployed in really creative ways in ensuring that the sector has near-term operating capital and longer-term loans. So I think, picking up on Roz's sentiments around how do we leverage assets, and Dave's sentiments around how do we get more creative with the assets that we have, we're going to see those opportunities emerge here in the near term. We're lucky to partner with the Phillips Family Office. I think has long been a leader in this space to think through how we can deploy capital in a new and creative way. So thank you to everyone on this call and those in the community, and Social Venture Partners Dallas, who's been an early leader in this space as well.
Amen. This is Jennifer. I want to also echo the focus on innovation. Innovation is going to be critical for all of us. We're not going to be able to solve today's challenges with yesterday's solutions. And we're seeing some great innovation right now as we're all coming together. And Dave, you mentioned Get Shift Done. I know that they have an application in this process that we'll be reviewing tomorrow. But we need to continue to work together to encourage new solutions to existing problems and the ways that we work collectively together. And I'm very optimistic based on what I've seen so far that we'll continue to do that.
Thank you. One of the things that Social Venture Partners has been working on for the last couple of years is this collective around the impact investing and supporting for-profit, for-good businesses. And we are finally starting to get some momentum, and then this happens. And so we absolutely have to be creative in all of our relationships with the for-profit businesses, with, as Jennifer said earlier, with the government, and every sector has to come together to work more creatively. Jennifer, talk to us a little bit about the role of advocacy right now with state legislatures and local governments, and the role that the United Way plays in what kind of things we should be talking to our political leaders about to help us address the immediate needs of the sector.
Well, and I think most everyone on the call knows that Congress has been talking about relief packages, and different iterations of that include not supporting nonprofits in a variety of ways and charitable deductions. And I think the best thing that we as a sector can do right now is to reach out to elected officials and encourage them to remember the role that nonprofits play in times of emergency and relief, but also in that longer term response and recovery that we're all going to be a part of as we rebuild. I know that the United Way team has been encouraging our donors and supporters to use their voice and reach out to elected officials. And there's some pretty easy ways to do it. I know that we've been posting on social media ways to contact your representatives and encourage them to remember the nonprofit sector. And I think we all need to be doing that. I know that the relief bill, I think it was the third iteration of it, came out last night. The third relief package. It was a little over 900 pages, and I'm not certain. I'm not an expert in everything that was included, but I think some things we do know is there's a $200 million emergency fund for emergency food and shelter. There's a SNAP funding, which is an additional $15.5 billion to ensure all Americans, including seniors and children, receive the food that they need. There's $3.5 billion for childcare through the Child Care Development Block Grant, and another $750 million for Head Start to meet emergency staffing needs. $8.8 billion in additional funding for child nutrition programs, and $900 million for low-income home energy assistance programs. I think payments, they also announced payments will be sent out to households supposedly in a few weeks, adults up to $1,200 and $500 per child, $3,400 for a family of 4. And it also includes large infusions for the healthcare industry, for education, and also for transit systems. So that's what we know now. I think we all need to continue to rally together to use our advocacy voices to encourage our elected officials to remember the sector.
Matthew, are you all doing anything along the lines of advocacy? Is that part of your culture? Will it be going forward? What are you all doing?
Tony, thank you. I mean, we're involved in a number of associations and advocacy-related causes that promote philanthropy. I mean, we have a great example locally here in Philanthropy Southwest that's headquartered in Dallas, and is doing this work on the Hill and elsewhere. We also are members of organizations like Council on Foundations and an advocacy group. And Jennifer is spot on. We should be reaching out to our elected officials. We should be putting pressure on those in Austin and Washington, D.C. to respond to this moment in a way that is appropriate. I'm heartened by the Senate's passage of a $2.2 trillion package. I'm also acutely aware that in the last decade, increasingly government has pushed solving the biggest challenges in our communities down to City Hall and to nonprofits and public schools. And so, yes, we should demand as much as we can from government. And I think we need to recognize that the problem solving that's going to make a difference to the average North Texan is happening at Dallas ISD. It's happening at Uplift Education. It's happening at the North Texas Food Bank. It's happening at City Hall. It's happening at Fort Oak Cliff. It is on the ground operators that are really ensuring that folks have the basic things that they need to sustain themselves in a time of crisis. And so good on government for the work that they've done to date, and just really focus on supporting local nonprofits and city government and public schools to immediately get resources out. That's our path forward for the foreseeable future.
And Roz, how about you folks? Are you doing much in the world of advocacy?
Well, like everything, things are contextual, and we had we do every 3 years a study on the economic issues impacting women in Texas. That study just concluded, and we're about to publish it along with an advocacy platform that speaks to some of the challenges that are now simply exacerbated facing women in the state. So we have a whole advocacy platform surrounding that. But relative to advocating for the sector, we, like Matthew, are involved in Philanthropy Southwest and other national philanthropic conversations. But a lot of our advocacy work has been strictly on behalf of those institutions and organizations that are serving the community of need that we are most involved with, and that being lower income women and children.
Dave, how about you? How do you see the intersection of philanthropy and advocacy?
It's important, and I think we all appreciate that it's become increasingly important. And we're involved in a lot of the same organizations that have been described, so I won't repeat that. What might be a little different is that because we have an educational consultancy, we actually have an advocacy effort down in Austin with about 10 people that are focused principally on statewide legislation affecting education, which until the coronavirus came across, if you asked North Texans, what is the one thing they'd like to be better about this community, it was education. So we have a heavy focus around that. And that effort, together with a ton of other people, resulted in House Bill 3, which provided significant funding for education, which I believe will make an enormous impact over a period of time. And we've learned, and we brought our board along to say, we have to step into more issues and raise our hand and speak to those issues on a fact basis, not a partisan basis, on a fact basis. And so I see us doing more of that. I think it's fair to say of that $2 trillion bill, there's a lot of good that's in there, that's some that's not so good. But if you just took the nonprofit sector, how much direct support is there in for the nonprofit sector? You'd have to round up and say modest. It's just not all that high. It is helping people, but in terms of through the nonprofits, is it making it easier for the nonprofits? In many cases, not a whole lot. And that's historically been the case. And it's having been in the business community for so many years, I'm a big business proponent, and they're getting a lot of funding here. And I understand that because that's where a lot of the employees are. But the economic impact and the quality of life impact that the nonprofit sector makes is enormous, and certainly equal and exceeding some of the subsectors that are going to get funding here through that bill. That's just the way it is. I don't know that we'll change that overnight. I think we can raise our hands and speak to that to a greater degree. And the reality is we have to make our case with our local donors. And I think we can make that case. And if we do, I think we will come through this.
I'm going to ask, thank you, Dave. I'm going to ask each of you to just do a little reflection on what you've learned in the last couple of weeks, what you've learned individually and as leaders, and just comment on how it's affected you personally. I know that the audience is clamoring right now and saying, you know, how do we access funds for our organization? And I know that each of your websites has that fairly well developed and laid out. And so I just wanted to take a moment. Matthew, maybe you'll start and respond to how has your thinking changed? What have you learned over the last couple of weeks?
Thanks, Tony. I mean, I think a couple of things come to mind. First is how do we balance and how do I lead in effectively balancing strategy with responsiveness? I think this is one of the greatest questions for philanthropy. And as a former nonprofit CEO, I was often so frustrated by going in and meeting with foundation leaders who seem to be in a 5-year strategic planning process every 3 years. And it left grantees often holding the bag on really important programmatic work. And so I think one of the deep questions that I'm reflecting on for the Dallas Foundation is how are we clear-eyed around the kind of community impact that we want to help curate, but remaining true to the history of community foundations to be responsive and community connected in times like these. So that's just that's something that I'm really dealing with. And how do I build that muscle in the team across the organization, from individual contributors to senior leaders? How do we find that right balance? That's certainly one reflection. Another reflection, you know, it's really around let's not let a good crisis go to waste. And I've just been so remarkably proud of my team and the Dallas Foundation's board their ability to be flexible. And again, to use this term, to be nimble. You know, in a day's time, we were able to pivot and push to remote work where everyone across the organization was pretty effectively managing and continues to manage their scope of work externally. And so there's just this sense of trust staff, give them the resources they need, give them the flexibility they need to thrive. And so that's been fun. And then lastly, I'll just say very perhaps vulnerably, I'm like a power extrovert. If you all are on the Myers-Briggs, if you've ever taken MBTI, I'm a 30 on my extroversion. And I've had to really shift and find a way to sort of feed that part in myself, because I've been in a home with my lovely bride and my 4.5-year-old little boy. And the only outside contact I've had are through video conferences like these. And so really just giving myself opportunity to reflect on what it is that I need and encourage my team to do the same, to reflect on what they need to thrive in uncertain times. So Tony, I don't know if I answered your question exactly, but that was a stream of consciousness around some of the recent reflections I've had individually and institutionally.
Which is exactly what I asked for. Thank you, Matthew. Roz, how about you? What have you learned over the last couple of weeks?
Tremendous humility. A true sense that I'm placed right now in a position that you know, I feel is both a blessing and a incredible responsibility, and wanting to be the best that I can be, wanting to be the best that our organization can be for those who look to us for support and guidance. Leaning hard on a phenomenal board who, you know, have all of our backs and are on the front lines themselves. Blessed and deep measure by the unbelievable commitment of our staff. We're checking in every couple of days, and we're little enough that we can all check in, you know, and realizing that they, like Matthew's team, when we said we're going home now, it all happened within a 12-hour period of time. Boom, boom, and everybody was up and running and taking care of themselves and taking care of their families and of one another. So I've been really humbled by this whole experience. And while sometimes I think we all can't help but look at the greater whole of this economic and health crisis and see that the intertwining realities of those are going to impact our lives for the rest of this old girl's life, okay? It's going to affect our lives for a very, very long time. And so believing that we have the capacity to change, believing that we have the capacity to be creative and committing to that. And I kind of keep in the back of my mind, you know, what Ava DuVernay said a couple of years ago when she said, when you're in your lane, there's no traffic. And right now I'm feeling like we're finding our lane, and in that lane, there's no traffic. We're gonna move ahead, and we're gonna move ahead together. So I'm grateful for all of you that are on this call, both listening and talking, for every effort that we're all making as a community to be whole. So thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
Well, first of all, I could listen to Roz all day. That was just terrific. Thank you very much for that. My own reflections are, I've now been in my role as President and CEO of the Communities Foundation just over 3 years. And I was reminded when I joined the organization that you can't look around the corner. And I certainly didn't see myself in this role, having been all the years in the business community. And it's one of the best things that's happened to me in my life. And just a couple of months ago, I thought we had really great alignment with our board on what were the most important things to do, and we're all set to go. And then this virus comes, and all of a sudden your priorities look a whole lot different. And that is the reality. The virus is a bad thing, but the fact of the environment changing is not necessarily a bad thing, because if we don't in our organization, and I think the others would agree, if we don't stay fresh and always be relevant to what's happening in the marketplace, then all those plans don't really for a tinker's dam. So being flexible and resilient and always moving ahead, even if the path is a little bit cloudy. And yes, it is very cloudy right now, but we're making decisions, and we'll course correct where we need to. So that would be one item. And I think the second would be how we do grants in the future and how we support this community, I think is certainly going to change. What do I see us doing more of? Certainly, our collaboration will likely be different in the future in some ways. I think moving to becoming more in partnership with our nonprofits versus grantor, grantee, I see more of that. I see our role as being, keeping track of what are the best practices that are happening, what are the best things my colleagues here on this call are doing. My fellow community foundation leaders around the country constantly looking for best practices. We're certainly doing that on the educational space, and bringing those to the community and sharing those and being part of implementing them so that we can be more and more effective with respect to our philanthropy. I think that's a trend, and technology is going to help us with that. And we have to be on the leading edge of it. We've not been historically, so we need to do more of that. And then finally, one of the great assets we have going for ourselves is that this sense of community here. And if we, in our role, can touch that sense of community with our donors and others here, we can get almost anything done. I really believe 90% of the solutions for the problems we have are here in this community. And the better we are at connecting with those who really care, whether they know it or not, about their community, with the way that they can help. We do that, there's millions of people here that we can tap that we haven't. I see that as something that's a real opportunity.
Thank you, Dave. Jennifer, I'm going to ask you to nuance your answer to that question just a little bit, because I know that in our audience today, there are people that are very panicked. There are people whose anxiety is very high. There are people who are suffering at much deeper levels than perhaps any of us on this panel are. How do we stay close to that pain? How do we stay close to that suffering? What have we learned about how to be engaged with the community on a level that we have never been asked to be engaged with before?
So I think, you know, the one thing that this experience has reinforced with me is something that we already know about North Texas. We are resilient and we are generous. And the one currency that we all have in common is generosity. And, you know, generosity is a powerful force to combat isolation and loneliness. And, you know, it's already prevalent in our world, our community right now, and it will potentially get worse. But our ability to give help and to give hope gives us a powerful agency that helps overcome feelings of powerlessness, loneliness, and isolation. And generosity comes in so many forms. You know, I think we're all blown away. I am certainly from the generosity of this community all the time, but especially in times of need right now. We're seeing tremendous generosity, and I am committed, as I know my colleagues are, to continue to do everything we can to raise money to address needs right now. But generosity comes in many forms. Generosity could be something as simple as calling a neighbor, checking on your friends, showing random acts of kindness. And I think that's the fuel, that's the energy, that's the momentum that we as a community and we as sector leaders, everyone who's dialed into this call right now, must focus on. That power of generosity. That power of generosity can create amazing change and momentum and movements that are necessary for all of us to weather and navigate this uncharted territory that we're in right now, but also to build the strength and reserve that's necessary for us to lead when we come out on the other side. And we will come out on the other side, and we will be stronger than ever before as a result of the work that we're doing together right now.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm going to ask for a commitment from my esteemed colleagues. I know that things are changing so rapidly, and I'm going to ask you here in front of over 1,000 people if you will be willing to come back together again in a few weeks, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and talk about what we're learning, what we're seeing, how we're adjusting those plans so that we can really stay proximate, meet the needs of the community, and make sure that we are responding to the voice of the people that need us the most. You know, I have been reminded of a famous quote, you know, when a very important and prestigious psychiatrist in our country was asked a question by a client of what he should do when he felt a nervous breakdown coming on. And he said, you should lock up your homes and you should go do something good for someone else. In this time of physical distancing, we can't necessarily lock up our homes. I mean, we can't leave our homes, we're locked in our homes. But we certainly, through technology and through the gift of giving, can reach out and do a lot in ways for our community. So once again, I just want to thank you for your inspiring words. I want to thank you for the work that you're doing for our community. But more importantly, I want to thank you for building the kind of relationships across the sector that allowed us to do this so quickly with one another and to be as responsive as we have been to our community. To our audience there that is listening to us, thank you for all that you're doing on the front lines. We want to hear from you, we want to support you, and we want to walk this journey together with you. So on behalf of my board of directors at Social Venture Partners, all of the partners that work with us, thank you very much from the bottom of my heart for your willingness to jump in on this and for your work around the clock to meet the needs of our community. Appreciate it. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Tony. Thanks to Social Venture Partners Dallas.
Thank you.